and welcome to this episode of The Word Unbound. This is episode 2 of season 1, Your Shepherd. Let's join our host, Will Sanderson, as he ponders what it looks like to be shepherded through distractions.
So last week, we started off our journey looking through the idea and the lens of shepherd by really getting a grip on the biblical language and imagery of the fact that we are sheep and that God is a shepherd. We went kind of theology 101 and walked through different passages of the Bible talking about God as our shepherd because it's a helpful illustration, and it's one that we're going to keep unpacking in the next few weeks, not just about God as our shepherd, but even some more aspects of that. And we didn't just do some theology 101, we also went biology 101 and kind of hit up some sheep facts and learned all about sheep, and we learned about how we all are like sheep. That's what the Bible uses to describe us. And so we learned a little bit more about that imagery. And in that, we really learned about how helpless sheep really are as animals. They really are. They can't do anything without their shepherd. And if you didn't listen to last week, I'd encourage you to go back and do so, because we really unpacked a lot of things about how sheep are incapable of finding their own water without the shepherd, that they are easily crushed in spirit, and so the shepherd needs to be gentle with them. We learned many other things about sheep, and so it really helps us put us in our own place when we think about sheep, and we learn some of that zoology so that we can understand the illustration. And we learned how helpless sheep are and how dependent they are upon the shepherd. And I kind of want to go back to that before we really dive into today's topic, which is being shepherded through distractions. And that's what we're going to be unpacking. But before we do, I want to remind us that we are all sheep, and that animal is a helpless animal, one that needs a shepherd. And we talked last week about how we find a good shepherd, a gracious and loving, compassionate, just and holy shepherd in the good shepherd, Jesus Christ. He is our good shepherd. But I want to go back to a passage that we'll probably turn to a handful of times throughout this season. But Phil, actually, if you could throw up Psalm 23 for us. So we have Psalm 23 here. If you've been around the Christian church for a little while, you really have probably seen this before. You've interacted it for a little while, I'm sure. I know people have coffee mugs of this, t-shirts of it. It's kind of everywhere. And so this season and this series, really the whole podcast, I really want to walk you guys through some different things and this idea of really climbing into the study with me and unpacking these ideas. And so I want to look at Psalm 23, and I want to look in particular just at the first 2 verses in regard to God as our shepherd. And so we see that declaration right here, right? That Yahweh is my shepherd. That's where David's going to start. At the very beginning, there's a declaration at the beginning of the psalm, and that is that Yahweh is my shepherd, and because of that, I shall not want, right? And we can unpack that for a while, but I just want to really actually look at these next things here in verses 1 and 2, because we see 4 different times he, right? So we have 4 things that God is doing. And this is the character of the shepherd. This is passive verbs for us. They're active for God, what God is doing in our lives as our shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is why God does these things, and also he's the actor. And so why bring this up? Well, I think it's because, and Phil, you can take that down for right now. We might pull that back up, but here's the thing. I know for you who are listening, it's probably true of you as I know it is of me, and that's the idea that we so desperately understand our need for God as shepherd. We want these 4 things. We want him to make us lie down in green pastures. We want to be beside those still waters. We know that we need the protection and the guidance of the good shepherd. But what happens when we want to pursue God We desire to put these things first and foremost in our lives, and yet we keep finding ourselves continually distracted, where our hearts and our souls just seem so loud. We want to slow everything down, and again, we see that he's the one that makes all these things happen, and yet we find ourselves running not to him, but seemingly to everywhere else. And we try to quiet our soul in so many other ways and avenues other than what Psalm 23 says, which is to run to God as our shepherd. So God is indeed our shepherd, and he is the good shepherd, but yet we so often run into pitfalls, into problems, and into issues where we want to follow after him, but yet for one reason or another, we still feel disconnected, disorganized, hurt, concerned, upset, and we try to go to run to that good shepherd, and yet we still can't seem to find any solace or peace there. And so what do we do with that? How do we slow down our souls? How do we quiet the noise? How do we find serenity amongst the chaos? How do we find peace within the war in regards to our lives? And I think at the end of the day, we run into some pitfalls in regards to pursuing Christ and pursuing God as our shepherd, because we have allowed, and indeed just by the nature of our culture today, we have so much noise going on. And so much of that comes from our technology. And that's the pitfall that I really want to focus on today, being shepherded through distraction. How do we cut throughout all the noise? How do we quiet things down and run after Yahweh, our good shepherd, knowing that we need him to do these things? You can pull that back up now again, Phil, actually, now that I think about it, because I want to unpack this just a little bit more. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness. And so you, Christian, you who are listening to this, you need to run to him. These are the things that he desires to do, that he longs to do, and indeed he's going to do in spite of our efforts for sure. But at the end of the day, really I look at this one, this is what, as I was thinking this week, verse 3, he restores my soul. And so often when life seems to bombard us with trials and tribulations and even just distractions, that's what we need. We need that restoration of soul. And too often our technology is what's going to try to fill in these things, that instead of running to God and allowing for him to make us lie down in green pastures, we're going to decide for ourselves how we're going to rest. Instead of finding our joy in him, we find our joy in our distractions, in our memes, in our videos, in Netflix or video games, or even our phones. He leads us beside these still waters, and we need him to guide. We learned last week that there are these obstinate sheep that will lead and try to go their own path against the will of the shepherd, and sometimes they'll even bring others with them, and they're aptly called Judas sheep. And I think so often in our own life, in our own heart, we can go off on our own thinking we don't need that good shepherd, but we need him to do all this work. And so that means that we need to cut through the noise and spend time with him. Slow things down. We've called it quiet time, call it silent time, devotional time, whatever you want to call it. This is what the Christian needs. And Phil, you can take that back, because we, for some reason in our lives, we have these masters, these little 4.5 inch, 5 inch masters of our lives, these bricks, these screens, this technology, and we're more connected than ever before with the world and everyone in it, and seemingly we are more disconnected than ever from the one who created the world and everyone in it. And more than that, I think we find ourselves so connected and so plugged into this world that we find it more difficult to tap out from the things that are going on and actually pursue the things that are eternal, pursue the things that are godly. And I think our technology can get in the way of that. And so I want to talk about this idea of shepherding through distraction, and in particular our technology, but I want to set some ground rules first. Because here's the thing, technology isn't the problem. It's not. Distraction is the problem, and you're going to have that whether you have technology in your life or not. The answer is not being a Luddite. At the end of the day, technology has come along to help us to ease or navigate the burdens of the fall ever since the fall occurred, right? I mean, the curse comes upon the land, and Adam then creates gardening equipment and plows, and so quickly irrigation comes, and then it's expanded and grown beyond that. Technology is not in itself the problem. The distractions are the problem. And so I think that's a helpful thing for us to realize before we really try to unpack anything more than this. And so I really want to try to walk through a few different things in regards to this idea of technology. And so there's actually a really helpful book out there that Tony Reinke put out. I think it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago now at this point. And it's called 12 Ways That Your Phone is Changing You. It's a good book. I recommend it. I think it's a helpful book, and I want to read a few sections from it in regards to this idea of technology and how it can kind of break our flow from this. Because here's the thing, just from your phone alone, even if we just zero in for just a little bit and talk about how that can just add so much noise to our life and to our soul. And our phone, we pick it up on average 4.3 times per hour. That may not sound like a lot, but that adds up a lot. I mean, you're thinking probably well over 60 times if you're up for a decent amount of time. And then how many times is that actually going to lead you to more and more distraction? And it's going to guide you away from thinking deeply and actually wrestling with things like your mortality, where your soul is actually going, what's actually going on in your life and in your heart, but you're just reaching for distraction instead. And so even when you do put the phone aside, even when it is in the other room and it's on airplane mode, and you do set time to devote yourself to prayer or the Word of God, you've already built into your life just this habit of constantly being distracted. And so you've lessened your ability to think deeply, to really slow down and consider. And Reinke hits on some of this in his book. Again, I commend it to you. There's a lot in here that we're not going to talk about, but I think at the end of the day, I want to run through some of these things. And that one of them is the actual weight of the distraction that we actually have. Some of you may think that it's not that big of a deal, but I want to argue to you that it actually is. As someone who most people probably didn't even know I even have one of these iPads, because they think I'm just always walking around with my fountain pens, my notebooks and things like that. I love analog. I am a huge fan of analog tools, but that doesn't mean that you just cut out all technology and you get rid of it, but instead you have to think wisely through it. And even if you try to cut out technology, you got to know why. You want to know what the reasons are, what the purpose is, what the goal is behind that. But furthermore, you need to know what you're running from. So Phil, if you could throw that up there for us. This is the first thing that I want to kind of hit on that Tony Reinke hits on, is just this idea of the weight of the distraction that is on top of you in regards to your phone in particular. And I think we could even expand that out to technology as a whole. Saying this, Reinke, Ofer Turrell, a psychologist at California State University, Fullerton, warns us that Facebook addicts, unlike compulsive drug abusers, have ability to control their behavior, but they don't have the motivation to control their behavior because they don't see the consequences to being that severe. But the consequences are real. As a digital distraction intrude into our lives and in unprecedented rate, behavioral psychologists and psychologists offer statistical proof that in study after study, the more addicted you become to your phone, the more prone you are to depression and anxiety, and the less you're able to concentrate at work and sleep at night. And digital distractions are no game. And again, I really want to just highlight that idea here, is that this is no game. These distractions that you're dealing with, I find it so interesting, this study right here where it says this, where he says that they have the ability to do so, but they don't see the consequences as that severe. Is that where you are? I mean, I know so often for me, this is where I'm at. Like I'm reading this book, I'm thinking about this topic, I'm wanting to really slow down and think through this idea of shepherding and quieting the soul and just having my own heart and life being shepherded by Yahweh as opposed to by my technology, my to-do lists, and everything that's shouting at me. And the irony of irony is how difficult it was to even slow down just to focus on this, even though that was the very thing I wanted to work on. And so I wonder how you're doing with this. I mean, these consequences are severe. But here's the other thing. They have the ability to control their behavior. You have the ability, especially you, Christian, with the Holy Spirit living inside of you, who equips you for all good works, and that he even lays them out before the foundations of the world that you may walk in them. You have the ability to repent. You have the ability to modify and change this. You're not a victim of your circumstances, your culture, your phone, any of that. You have the ability to change it. Now, that's going to be difficult, but I want you to realize that the consequences actually really are severe. And Phil, you can pull that down for right now. And so I want you to really think back. And if you have an iPhone, you can actually go back and you can look at your screen time and see what kind of time you spent there. But it also tells you how many times you picked your phone up. And some of those might not be helpful because it's sitting on the table, and so you pick it up to, throw it in your bag so you can go in the car, and maybe it counts it when you pick it up out of the car. I don't know how all that stuff works. I don't know how they track that kind of stuff. Kind of creeps me out that they do. But I think at the same time, it's helpful to slow down and say, what is the weight? What is the damage that this is actually doing to my sleep, to my thought life, to my ability to concentrate, to think deeply, and more than that, to go to the throne of grace and actually spend time there, where you want to talk to God, you want to pray to him, but you don't feel like you can actually carry a conversation because you just want to be distracted, because prayer is going to be slow. It's going to be silent. You sit down to read the Bible, but instead of actually slowing down and actually digesting it, you read it like it is a Twitter feed, like it is a blog post. But here's the thing. When you read the Bible, the goal is not to skim through it to get to the end. The goal is to be constantly sanctified continually again and again. And so you're going to be distracted in life. You're going to be distracted by your phone, but also, like I said, technology isn't the issue. And Phil, you could pull this one back up again. The problem isn't that you are distracted. The problem isn't that you have technology. The problem is what these distractions are doing to your heart. Again, this is what Ranke says. Whether you have a smartphone or a dumb phone or no phone, you cannot escape that a life divides your attention. Going on, he says, we face necessary interruptions and worldly interruptions. We face unavoidable distractions of godly marriage and avoidable distractions of consumer culture. From the outset of this study, we must die to the idea that distraction-free life is possible. It is not, and it never has been. The holy life is piously complex, meaning we must learn how to apply distraction management in every situation. And so again, as we are working through this idea of being shepherded in the midst of noise and in the midst of technology and how we think through this, again, the goal is not to think that a distraction-free life is possible. It's not. And it never has been, and it never will be. You could be a Luddite. Go for it. You can get rid of all your social media, and you can switch to a dumb phone, and guess what? You're still going to have a spouse that needs to talk to you. That you're going to want to spend time with, and things that are going to distract you. You're still going to have a job. And even if your job is pastoral ministry, you're still going to have people that you're talking to. You're still going to have things outside of the Word of God, events you have to run, things you have to do. There's going to be things that you have to take care of in life. You're going to have distractions. And so the goal of technology is, one, to help eliminate those distractions. But I think sometimes we've allowed the means to become the end for us. And the more digitally we are invested in this world, the less we're actually able to disconnect from that. And we end up allowing to put technology above our own lives and souls. And so, Phil, you can pull that down again. And so that's something I really want to hit on is technology isn't sinful in and of itself. right? There's nothing wrong with a hammer. That's technology, technically. There's nothing wrong with a camera. There's nothing inherently sinful about these things, but these are going to be distractions. Where it becomes an issue is when you are being shepherded by someone or something other than the God of the universe. When you have replaced Yahweh as your shepherd, well, then you don't get those first 3 verses of Psalm 23 anymore. You don't get to confidently say, I shall never want. You don't have that promise anymore. If you've replaced Yahweh as your shepherd, then you're going to run to technology or to-do list. You're going to have your soul restored by having your to-do list done. And that ultimately, listener, is going to give you a very heavy burden, and a yoke that will be unbearable for you. And there is Jesus crying out, saying, my burden is easy and my yoke is light. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And that's my encouragement to you, is run to the rest of your Savior and run to it preeminently. Run to it first. Be shepherded by Him over and above your to-do lists, over and above your tasks, your email inbox, all of those different things. As much as this technology cries out to you, these are distractions for the soul. The phone isn't the problem. The distractions aren't the problem. Replacing God with mammon is the problem. You can't serve 2 masters. And so often that's what our distracted soul comes down to. And you think I got this nailed? I don't. I mean, there's a reason why I wanted to tackle this and talk about it and study it for my own life and heart. And that's what we're doing here together is walking through this book, walking through a chapter and verse with it. And then, Phil, if you could throw this up there, one last thing from Tony Reinke on this. And again, check out the book, worth reading. If you got friends that like to read books together, great book, worth diving into. This right here, I think, is helpful. As we're looking at this idea of slowing down, this idea of actually filling your heart and your life with being shepherded by the God of the universe, he says this: isolation plus feeding on vanity equals soul-starving loneliness. And so often that is what our life is. We are isolated, and even when we are alone, we're so focused on self, on identity and who we are and what we're doing and where we're going. Again, all good things. It is helpful to work hard and labor as unto the Lord. But yet when we are so focused on ourselves and we are feeding on vanity, whether that's through social media or whether that's just through our own focus, where even our prayer lives are only ever about us or the things that we care about and not exalting God and spending time in Him, but we're only praying for the people that we know that are sick or that are traveling or the trials that we have going on, but we don't ever get to thankfulness or worship. When we become self-absorbed, even when we spend time alone, what we're going to find is that crippling, difficult loneliness. And so if you're listening to this and you are in this category where you're isolated, perhaps you're not even a part of a local church, you're feeding on vanity, filling your mind and your heart continually with yourself, your ideas. And again, they may not even be bad things. Things like social media or even goals or productivity, and you're focused on your own vanity, that is going to lead to soul-starving loneliness. However, isolation and communion with God equals soul-feeding solitude. Solitude does not need to be a punishment, though that's like the worst thing that can happen to you when you get thrown into prison, because we can't be alone with our thoughts, our minds, and we can't be pulled away from community. But this right here, this isolation, this decided isolation, to spend time by yourself alone, but not to focus on you, but instead communion with God, that's going to feed your soul. That's you running to Yahweh saying, "Be my good shepherd, that I may never want, that I might find rest for my soul, that I might slow down, that I might embrace you, that I might have be led beside still waters and into green pastures, that I might be led down paths of righteousness. This is soul-feeding solitude. When you are God-focused, when you are shepherd-focused, when you are a sheep that is in love with the shepherd, the good shepherd, that is soul-feeding solitude. And then getting back into the practical, he says this, and when it comes to the morning hours, Charles Spurgeon, the big dog that's over my shoulder right there. Charles Spurgeon, permit not your minds to be easily distracted, or you will often have your devotion destroyed. Vital to our spiritual health, we must listen and hear God's voice saying to us, be still and know that I am God. Every morning, we must take time to stop, to be still, to know that God is God and that whatever happens, we are his children. Digital technology must not fill up all the silent gaps of life. To slow down, to not be easily distracted. Why? You will find that your devotion is destroyed. I love Spurgeon just got away with words. And this doesn't say get rid of all of your technology. There are actually studies that say that people follow Bible reading apps better, or Bible reading plans better on an app and digitally than it is on their phone. Even John Piper works and reads his Bible on an iPad. I'm not saying get rid of all the technology, but what I'm saying is get rid of the distractions. So maybe that's throwing everything on airplane mode. Being practical. Maybe it's sitting there saying, yeah, I know I'm distractible. I need notebooks and pens and paper because that to me is how I'm going to be able to work better. That's going to keep me from the devotion destroying distraction. And instead, I'm going to be able to feast my soul and my life on the good shepherd, to be focused continually on him, to find rest and peace. And Phil, if you could take that down for a second, that'd be helpful. Because we need to find rest and peace. Psalm 46:10, as he had on there, be still and know that I am God. Listener, it's okay. I know you've got all these distractions, these pops and these pings and these dings and all the technology that's shouting at you. And that's not even to say the entertainment side of things. And yeah, we're going to talk about that next week, and the idea of how our entertainment shepherds us and guides us and molds us in so many different ways. And now we're just talking about even just this little part. Whether it's your video games or the TV shows that are going to go unwatched, the games that are going unplayed, the messages that are going to be unread, the emails unsent. It's okay to slow down because you're not God. Be still and rest in the fact that God is God, and let the world spin without you for a while. It'll be fine. Go and feast your soul on the good shepherd. Be fed by him. Be watered by him. Be nurtured by him. Go to this place where you will find rest for your souls, where you will find joy. Find all of that. And then, Phil, if you could throw it back up. As I was thinking about this last thing, as I've been wrestling through just this idea of distraction in the heart and how we could even have good intentions with our technology, with our life, but yet we could still completely miss the point. And we could be productive. Again, the goal is not to get rid of technology. And there are plenty of great resources to dive into. And if you have questions, you can throw them out there into the comment stuff. When we do our wrap-up episode, I'd love to answer more questions about this, about places to go or tips or tricks or tools or whatever it is. But because there's a lot of good and godly things. I mean, the goal isn't to get rid of Things 3 and Notion and your apps and everything like that. That's not the point. The goal is to get rid of distractions. And when I think about distractions and missing the main points, I'm reminded of Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, verse 38 says this: Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered the village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house, and she had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted. We'll just circle that right now. With much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, You are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her. Again, let's unpack this because there's so much truth that's in here and so much of our own heart. We see this picture of Jesus showing and he's teaching, and then Mary gives this beautiful example of just sitting at the feet of Jesus, just listening to him, sat at his feet, the same phrase that we still use today, and listen to the teaching, basking in the teaching of the Good Shepherd. With all the hurriedness of the event going on around her, she's just sitting there and enjoying Jesus, spending time with Jesus, listening to Jesus, being shepherded and guided by Jesus. But Martha was distracted with much serving. That's the thing. It's not a bad thing. She's serving. This is the kind of thing that I tell the people and young adults and students all the time: go out there, be serving, get to know people, get into people's lives. And she's doing that. But she's serving and she's distracted. She's anxious. She's troubled. And more than that, she's eclipsing the sun. And in so doing, living and walking in darkness. Not sitting at the Lord's feet, but instead being constantly moving, constantly hurrying. And you can see the pride that this leads to. She went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone?" Jesus, I know you're the God of the universe, but don't you see all the chairs that need to be stacked? Don't you care that the bread is burning? Don't you realize that there's all this going on? And you can see the pride of like, God, do you not realize all that I have going on? How could I possibly, with everything that's happening, everything that's going on, everything that needs my attention, and I need to take care of it because no one else will, because I can't just sit around like Martha does and like Mary does and just spend time with you. I have to get all these things done. And Jesus responds like this: "Martha, Martha." That's a rebuke in the ancient world. We probably wouldn't pick up on that as much now, but to say someone's name twice like that, that's pretty strong. It's like using a middle name nowadays. You are very anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. One thing is necessary: to be sheep in the sheepfold of the Good Shepherd. To sit at the feet of Jesus Christ, to be guided by him, to be restored by him. And so maybe you turned on this podcast and you're anxious about many things and you're looking for tips and tricks and ways to silence the noise. And I hope you got that. To recognize that's not a quick fix, but it's a reorienting of the heart. What's most important to you? What is preeminent to you? What's number one? Seek first the kingdom of God, not just literally the first thing you do in the morning, but even preeminently. First and foremost, because there's one thing that is necessary, and that is to sit at the feet of God, to have him be your shepherd. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Martha didn't choose bad things, but she didn't choose the best things like Mary did. To sit at the feet of Jesus, to be restored and refreshed in soul. Your technology is not your problem. It's not your email, your Slack, your Instagram, your Xbox. It's slowing down and understanding that you're not God, but that you are a sheep in need of a shepherd. And you're going to be shepherded by someone or something. And we're going to talk more about that next week, about how you may be being shepherded by more than you even realize. But for this week, I personally need to be reminded, and I pray that you are reminded as well, that we need to slow down, to not be anxious and troubled about so many things, to silence the noise, to sit at the feet of Jesus, to go and boldly declare and cry out to him, "Yahweh is my shepherd. I will never even begin to lack. He leads me beside still waters. He leads me into green pastures. He restores my soul. He leads me on paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He does all these things in and through and to me." That's the shepherd, him taking care of us. And so I pray that this has been helpful for you to think through. If you have more questions or comments, I'd love for you to throw them down there. But this week, let's slow down and sit at the feet of the good shepherd. Even in the midst of distractions, may we be shepherded in and through this life in this world that clamors so much for our attention. May we pursue him preeminently.